Hey everybody, we're getting ready to get started here, and just want to welcome you all to the special Levitt lecture that is in honor of Greg White. So I'll get the program kicked off here, and just to tell, I'm Myra Muramoto. I'm the department chair for family medicine, and it's our honor and privilege to host the Levitt lectures, and in particularly the Greg White CSTAHR lecture that is dedicated particularly to Mr. Greg White. So just to tell you a little bit about what the Levitt lectures are about. Dr. Lewis Levitt was born in Denver in 1896, and he graduated from the University of Colorado School of Medicine in 1927. So the history of this goes way back. Practiced medicine in Denver until 1967. And when he passed away, in 1978, he bequeathed $75,000 to the Department of Family Medicine to establish an endowed lectureship. And this became the Levitt Distinguished Speaker Series. And over the years, the department has been privileged to host a number of distinguished visiting scholars, leaders, authorities from different perspectives to consult with us, share their wisdom with us, and on topics that are related to primary care and healthcare more broadly. To introduce CSTAHR and Greg White, who we honor through this lecture, we have Mada Gudavelli and Michelle Wheeler. I'll turn the mic over to them, and you can introduce yourselves. Okay, there you go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mada Gudavelli, and I'm a fourth-year medical student. It was during my first year that I had a really, really hard day at school and was questioning my place in medicine and my place just overall at the school. I felt really disconnected from community. I had just moved back to Denver, and a friend from class said, "Hey, have you heard of CSTAHR?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." And she's like, "You should come." I was like, "Okay, why not?" And when I went, I found community. I found a lot of passionate students, community members that came together to have very frank and loving discussions about healthcare racism and what we can do together. And it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my medical school experience. CSTAHR stands for Community and Students Together Against Healthcare Racism. It was founded over a decade ago when students were inspired by a lecture given, and they came together with community members to establish this group. We have a lot of founding members here today, and I think it just speaks to how sustainable CSTAHR has been within the community. Since its founding, we've had many students. These students have returned as residents and doctors to lead some of our projects that we're doing even today in CSTAHR, and it's been really, really incredible. I'd love to share with you guys some of our values. So we believe in freedom, justice, peace, love, humility, and community. Some of our projects include responding and preventing gun violence, working with the Boys and Girls Club to provide mentorship and exposure to the healthcare professions and some of those topics, as well as the Greg White Lectureship Series. And I really want to make a special shout out to Jordan Nelson and Eric Fu, who are in the audience today, and they did a really tremendous job helping organize this event, and we're really thankful for you. I hope you guys are inspired today, feel the love, and feel really empowered to attack this really prevalent thing in our community and come together with us. I'd now like to introduce Michelle Wheeler, one of our community members who's going to speak about Greg White.
Thank you.
So my name is Michelle Wheeler, and Greg and I we were engaged to be married. We never did get an opportunity to do that. But today I just want to tell some of you guys that aren't familiar with who Greg was, a little bit about him. So he was a very, very interesting man. He had so many sides to his personality. For example, he could hold a lengthy conversation with you on any subject: football, religion, wrestling, politics, music, cars. He could talk about anything. And from time to time, he used to like to share with just me only his conspiracy theories. Greg loved his 2 children, but he adored his 4 grandchildren, to the extent that he named his business after his 4 grandchildren. And the name of that was Grand 4 HVAC, which stands for heating, I don't know, HVAC. He could fix anything also, okay? Appliances, cars, computers, broken furniture, you name it, Greg could fix it. He always was reading something. He was either reading newspapers, books, magazines, the Torah, and research journals. He could even cook up a storm in the kitchen. And he was dubbed Mr. Fred Astaire on the dance floor. Some of you may not get that, Fred Astaire, but okay. He was a real special man. I met Greg in January 2009 at President Obama's inaugural ball celebration here in Denver at the DoubleTree Hotel. And several days later, we went on our first date after he begged me for my phone number to a friend of his house. And it turned out that that friend was also a friend of mine. So it was obvious to me at that time that we were traveling in the same circles, but we had never met before the night of the ball. So I began inviting him to CSTAHR meetings as part of a date night. After a few meetings, he was hooked. He fell in love with the students, Vimal, Jody, Carmen, Clint, and Bella, just to name a few of the founding students. Over the years, their relationships grew. They traveled to conferences together. They made informational videos. They broke bread together, especially during the Christmas holidays at Janet's home, right there. More than anything, however, Greg loved to listen to and talk to the students about their plans for the future and his experience, his life growing up as a young Black man and his experiences with the healthcare system. Dr. Tillman Farley, who isn't here today, the inspiration for the creation of the CSTAHR program, and Greg also developed a strong relationship with each other. Greg passed away on April 20th in 2018 of colon cancer. And lastly, I will say to you that Greg loved CSTAHR, and he would always tell me that he truly believed that you guys will change the world. That's it.
Thank you so much, Rita and Michelle.
Greg White.
He was a complex person with lots of layers.
So I think I would describe Greg as someone who was just incredibly committed, really dedicated to working towards health equity and using his own experiences to help inform how we can create a more just healthcare system.
Greg was a very unique kind of guy to me.
Some of the adjectives that I would use to describe him: passionate, unapologetic. He was just overall just this wonderful, genuine human being that I think had a really difficult life, and in my mind found a way to heal through CSTAHR. Hi, I'm Erica Martinez. I am currently a third-year resident at Stanford University.
Hi, I am Bella Mohapatra. I'm a family physician that works at Clinica Family Health.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie Garcia. I'm a fourth-year medical student in the MD and PH program at CU.
Hello, my name's Michelle Wheeler, and I'm a founding member of CSTAHR.
I think that CSTAHR really meant a lot to him because it was one of his ways of using all of his experiences with racism and the trauma associated with that to make our community better.
He helped create CSTAHR. He chose to invest in us and chose to teach us because he wanted to make healthcare better for people.
I think he valued most the relationships that he had with the students. He really thought that they were going to change the world in terms of, getting rid of racism in healthcare. He always kept us on track. He would always steer the conversation back to, so what are you going to do? And not just the individual. What are you going to do as a group? What is CSTAHR going to do as a group to end, racism in healthcare?
So this is a letter that I wrote to Greg. It was really just more of a personal reflection for me. I wrote it the night that he died. Dear Greg, I should have written this when I could have read it to you in person, but I missed that chance. So this is the best I can do. Actually, the best I can do is work throughout my life like you did to make the world a better place. I promise to listen to my patients with my whole heart, to consciously evaluate my own biases and the impact that my perceptions have on other people, and to work with others to create the world that you envisioned.
I know I'm going to be a better physician and a better surgeon for my patients because I met Greg. I think that his legacy was that each of us are going to carry a little bit of him to all of our patient encounters, to all of the projects that we're a part of. Speaking on behalf of all students and all current physicians, residents, everyone who has interacted with the CSTAHR community, I feel very confident in anyone who has known him that they are going to continue to work to fight against racism and discrimination in every way, shape, or form.
Thank you for sharing that. And Maida and Michelle, thank you for your personal stories and telling us more about CSTAHR and your relationship with Greg. So now it's my honor and pleasure to introduce on behalf of CSTAHR and the Department of Family Medicine and CU, Dr. Tanjala Purnell. And let me tell you a little bit about this amazing woman. So she's an epidemiologist and health services researcher with over a decade experience focused on promoting equity in kidney health, transplantation, and closely related cardiometabolic conditions. She's assistant professor of epidemiology and surgery at Johns Hopkins, and she serves as the director of education for the Bronchitis Center for Advancement of Community Care, executive director of the Health Freedom Path to Wellness program, director of the Investigator Development Corps at the Mid-Atlantic Center for Cardiometabolic Health Equity, and founding director of the Faith-Based Alliance for Kidney Health Equity, and the Bold Health Equity Initiative. I'm asking myself, does this woman ever sleep? And that's not all. So she has received several national and international research honors and published findings from her work in leading medical journals, including JAMA and Health Affairs. She's also served in multiple educational leadership roles where she's facilitated health equity research, mentoring opportunities for over 150 medical and public health students and scholars. She's organized seminars for over 7,000 academic and community members and developed health equity research methods courses for over 6,000 learners at Johns Hopkins, as well as other institutions worldwide. Dr. Purnell is a member of the board of directors for the National Minority Organ Tissue Transplant Education Program, a member of the governing board for the Living Legacy Foundation of Maryland, and a member of the National Kidney Foundation Transplant Advisory Committee. She's immediate past chair of the American Society for Transplant Surgeons, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and is the inaugural recipient of that American Society for Transplant Surgeons Excellence in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Award. She's also a recipient of the Congressional Black Caucus, Health Brain Trust, and National Minority Quality Forum's Top 40 Under 40 Leaders in Healthcare. And then she's also the 2023 recipient of the National Kidney Foundation Excellence in Transplantation Award. So I'm sure you never sleep. So with that, Dr. Tanjala Purnell, come on up.
Wow, thank you so much for that warm introduction. And just thank you for the invitation to be here. You'll see me sort of standing in weird places because I'm a little vertically challenged. And so it's hard to see this side if I stand right in front of the computer. And I would like to see your beautiful faces. So again, thank you for having me. Wow, this is such an honor. First of all, as I sort of shared with a couple of people this morning, to have those who are coming behind you to deem something that you're doing worthy enough of honoring, right, a man of this stature and just such an important occasion. That's an honor, right? That's an honor for me. And I thank you, for inviting me. I also didn't realize, honestly, while listening to the story, thank you so much for sharing how much he reminded me of my own father, to be quite honest with you. This morning in a small group discussion, I talked about my mother, who is still living and is a retired educator after teaching for 34 years. But my father passed away at 49 of a massive stroke. And the same characteristics and descriptions that you use can talk about any subject, ranging from wrestling to cars to food, was the life of the party. I could have, if I closed my eyes, I would have thought, oh, she's describing my father, and she never even met him, right? But he was also lost prematurely. And so again, this moment is not lost on me. And I think, of course, it's for a reason. Can we go off script? To be honest, I don't have a script. I'm going to tell you the truth. But can we take a moment that I learned today is a special day for a different reason. Lisa, I know you hate me for this. Will you please stand for a moment? I learned that today is this young lady's birthday. Happy birthday. Bless you. Yes, I asked her, so what are you doing here? You're supposed to be off on the beach or somewhere. Yeah. Thank you. So I titled today's lecture Sick and Tired: Galvanizing Multi-Stakeholder Efforts to Address Structural Racism and Persistent Health Disparities. I could have titled it anything. I probably will still share a similar story because I try to make sure this story is rooted in, the momentous occasion itself. Why are we here today? First of all, to honor, right? Mr. Greg White, who's a beloved and valued member of CSTAHR. He was dedicated to erasing racism in healthcare. And he was lost early due to colon cancer. Did I get that right? And it made me think about another person who I often love to channel. So a civil rights leader. I like to always have a motivating person or quote or something to help ground me and to remind me again of the why we're here and the responsibility that we have once we recognize that these injustices remain and that there are things that we can do about them. And I'll tell you, one of my sheroes, right, is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. Who is she? Huh. Did anybody else already know about who she? You did? What stands out to you about her? Mhm. Absolutely. And for me, she's also from where I'm from. She's from the Mississippi Delta. I'm from the Mississippi Delta, right? But her journey was very different from mine. She was what I would call bold and courageous, right? At many times, she was almost murdered. She was beaten within an inch of her life. She was um, sterilized, right, without her consent. Her home was firebombed. She was separated from her family. She was threatened on every occasion, and yet she kept going. And she said the reason why she kept going is because, and I think I'm paraphrasing, but she said, even if I fall, right, I'm going to fall 5 feet 4 inches forward in the fight for freedom. Who can't? That's bad, right? That's bad, right? And when you really think about it, and that was, you can probably see the beginning part of my lecture title, Sick and Tired, right? As also sort of a tribute to her. And it asked again, why do you keep going? Why do you keep going? She said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think she was also sick and tired of her community being sick and tired. Because to be honest, she could have relocated, right, to Harlem or many other places because she reached celebrity status at that point. She returned back to the Mississippi Delta where she was literally living down the street from one of the people who had tried to kill her, right? And she kept coming back because she knew she had a responsibility. That's who she was at her core. She was unfortunately also lost due to cancer, breast cancer. There's now a nonprofit organization in the Delta named in her honor that's devoted to breast cancer awareness and prevention, but she was also lost. I know, and I thank my transplant and nephrology friends in the room. Normally, of course, that's my first line of research, so it will appear here. But I wanted, to kind of start by first talking about the why am I here? Why do I care? Who are you? Why do you care? And kind of we can start in cancer, but I want to make the case that it really doesn't matter what we talk about. I could tell you several of these slides are about cancer, or I could tell you they're about kidney disease, they're about hypertension, they're about lots of things because many of these injustices are rooted in the same factors, right? The same driving forces that are allowing groups of people to always remain the sickest or to always die, the earliest. A lot of those same factors. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Before I tell you all of my business, I like to hear, if that's okay, from a couple of people in the audience, preferably a couple of folks who consider themselves trainees, right? Whether you're a student or, some other level of in your academic training. Should I adjust? Okay. All right. Just making sure. Oh, thank you for the mic. Two questions, right? We did an icebreaker last night. I won't ask you that question. It was what was the question? Um yes. We had some interesting answers. It was fun, right? I'm not gonna ask you that question today. I want to ask you two questions. Who are you? What do you care about? That's it. Any takers? Come on, I know you're not scared. You're training to be physicians. Oh my goodness. We're going to start at the top, the Vice Chancellor.
Hi, I am Regina Richards. I am a mother. I am a wife. I am a daughter. I am a sister. I'm an auntie. I am a friend. I'm an educator. I am a scholar. I am a social worker. I am a Christian. I am an activist and an advocate, and I'm a proud Black woman. Why do I do this work? Because I too am sick and tired of watching my people have lack of access, of structural systems keeping all people out, and social injustices that are rooted from 500 years ago.
Yes, ma'am. We're snapping today or clapping today or thank you. Who else? Let's do at least two more people. Who are you? I see another hand. Who are you? What do you care about?
I'm a person that I'm striving to do better because
Mm,
I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors.
mm,
And what do I care about? I care about everything.
all right.
I hate to see people hurting.
Mm,
And there's so many things in our community that are people are being hurt and it stays with them for the rest of their life. So I would like to make a difference.
thank you for sharing. What we doing? What we doing? Clapping or snapping or you know? I love it. Let's do one more. Who are you? What do you care? I see my friend Lily in the back. Hi, Lily. Who are you? What do you care? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I know who you are. So I think the room should know who you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lily Cervantes, and I am a mom, a wife, a friend, a sister, the daughter of two undocumented immigrants, and I deeply care about how we value people. And I guess value specifically realizing that health is truly a human right.
Mm,
And that everyone should be treated with dignity.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you all for engaging. I think, what's it? Like we're in church. Is there another? Is there another? So, and thank you all so much for sharing. I think it's so important, right? To start with those foundational questions to ask ourselves. And in particular, those of you who are yet still on your journey, right, to becoming whoever you will become. So as opposed to starting with, well, what's your title, what's your status, right? It's who are you? How do you define yourself and what do you care about? Part of who I am is rooted in where I'm from and my lived experiences, right? I think that's true, right, for many of us. And I kind of shared some of photos here. The top left photo is my high school. And that is smack dab in the middle of the Mississippi Delta. I know you probably expected to see a farm or cow. I don't know what you expected to see, right? But it's often not anything positive when you think about certain places and what you've heard about certain areas. The top right photo is the historic chapel at Tougaloo College, my alma mater, HBCU in Jackson, the capital city. That was really a hot seat for a lot of civil rights activists, right? Dr. King came through there, lots of people came through there, especially during, Freedom Summer, the 1960s, when Mississippi was the place, the convening spot. And I shared this morning that many, as we know, of the activists were students. But it's kind of hard to be a student activist and also be a student of a public institution, right, in the state of Mississippi. So many of them were expelled. Tougaloo is private. So Tougaloo can accept whoever they wanted to accept. So a lot of the civil rights activists ended up convening together there, right? And I mention that because there are times when you think, what I'm doing enough? Will it matter? Am I too young? I'm not established enough, right? And I look back at some of the stories and the books that were written by these student activists. These people were 18, 19, 20 years old. Several of them actually said, I thought I was going to die multiple times. And they would say that they would sing songs together if I should die, what. So it's like going in and saying there's something bigger than even my own life that I find is worth fighting for, even if I don't see the gains in my own lifetime. And I start here because I feel like for a person who cares about reaching this state of health equity, right, and justice and all of this, sometimes it can be very discouraging. We may see progress in one area followed by worsening disparities in other areas. You may see and ask yourself, well, is what I'm doing even relevant? Will it even matter, right? In the long run, will I ever see this difference that I'm striving to make? And the answer that came to me during those moments is that it's not about you, right? It was never about you. Even if you never see it, it could still be foundational work, right? For the gains that are yet to come. And I said that to say because I know that for people who really care about this work, it's the long game. It's also a sprint, right? It's a sprint marathon because, we talked about in what Health Policy 101, these policy windows. And when they open, you have to kind of be ready to run through the window. You have to be prepared. You have to have maximize, right, that opportunity. But in reality, it's really the marathon. It's the long game. The bottom right are several Tougaloo students, well, former Tougaloo students who staged a sit-in at the Jackson Library and were arrested. And now, 50 years later, that same library honors them, right, as the Tougaloo Nine. I'm sure they didn't know that, right, 18, 19, 20. But again, many of them lived to see it. And then in the left bottom is just because it's the Mississippi Delta, the blues, right? So this is the B.B. King Museum. But anyway, this is what I think about when I think about home. But, we're talking about health and public health. And often, right, what we think about, what we see are maps. I told you I could have started this with a map of kidney disease. I could have started with a map of heart failure or heart disease death rates. I started with cancer because of, the moment that we're in. But in many ways, the same states, right, that are the darkest shaded, regardless of what condition we're talking about, we often, right, see those same patterns. I highlighted for us Colorado, which according to the CDC estimates, it says the death rate was 127.2, and versus in the state of Mississippi, 176. And you see that the darker shaded means of higher age-adjusted death rates. And you can kind of see, right, certain patterns. I also saw that sort of as a student. And I started as a computer scientist. My bachelor's degree is in computer science. I said that to say, you can come from any walk of life, right? Once you recognize that these injustices exist, which is why I titled this Multi-Stakeholder, because in reality, we all are needed to come to bat, right? We don't have the luxury of saying that this work is only for a select few. This is something that we all have to collectively decide is worth fighting for, right? A state of equity. And as a computer scientist, of course, your brain is trained to pick up patterns, right? And if I keep seeing maps that all have these same patterns, I see a couple of heads, not right? And not only with health conditions, but things like concentrated areas of poverty, lack of higher education, lack of high paid, high wage jobs, whatever it is, you'll see you can almost lay those maps on top of each other. And to me, that indicated this is not random, right? And if it's not random, then it's probably something that's sort of allowing these things to happen. And if so, we should probably investigate. And I should probably figure out how to get into this game. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just felt like I had to do something, right? And that was sort of what led to this journey. We know, right, if we look at cancer diagnoses by sex and race, ethnicity, we know that there are existing disparities in terms of death rates and the prevalence of cancer. And this is just a graph from the CSTAHR national data set. If we look again at cancer death rates, this is now again looking from the CSTAHR death rates, and we see again by race, Black versus white and American Indian, Alaska Native are sort of leading the pack. When we stratify by race ethnicity, But as I mentioned, I could have shown you kidney disease. I could have shown you lots of other graphs. So the question then becomes, if we see these same patterns over and over, how did we get here, right? We got here in a lot of different ways, right? A lot of different paths. And I think that that's why it's so hard to tackle a problem like health disparities, like, systemic racism, because there's so many factors operating at multiple levels of influence. And often, even if you tackle one factor, another factor may then be interacting with the gains that you had at that particular level. Or you may not even be tackling the right factor that will give you the biggest gains, right? And we sort of see this in the health disparity space, which is also why it takes all of us, because no one person can be the expert in every single aspect of each of these factors that collectively are responsible for why we see the striking health disparities that we see today. We need people who are really great at policy work. We need people who are social workers and who think about the lived and social conditions, right? We need clinicians. We need people who can look at big data and look for patterns and try to help to inform interventions. We need all of these things, right? We also have to, again, increasingly recognize the importance of the lived experience. I'm sure you've all seen, right, this type of graph that talks about, how much of a person's health is really due to their health behaviors versus what happens within the context of the clinical encounter versus sort of the lived conditions and physical environment. And if we know that these things are important, right, we then have to also prioritize thinking about how do we make those connections? How do we help to bridge those gaps? But more importantly, how do we help to elevate people who are doing, right, some of this work? Because I think that in the way that many of us were trained, we're trained to be the best. We're trained to, when we see a problem, to tackle it, to be the best person, to have the answers to this, to that. What may be counterintuitive sometimes is thinking about the fact that if we're all here, then we all have a certain level of privilege, right? We do. And we all have a platform in some way. And sometimes the question is, how much of this do I need to take on and take the leadership role in and really be the driving force versus how much of my own privilege and my platform do I need to hand over to someone else who may not have the opportunity, right, to be in this room, but may have groundbreaking ideas on how we can sort of bridge those gaps. So thinking about how we define community and how we define expertise, right? We know that COVID-19, right, came along and rocked all of our worlds. But in particular, for people who are at the highest risk of facing these types of social and economic challenges, we know that COVID-19 was especially bad in many of those conditions. Thinking back to when we were first told to isolate ourselves and to order all of our food online and to work from home and all of these things to protect ourselves. But what about the people who didn't have that luxury, right? And we know that there was a higher burden of death. There was also, when we think about it, a higher burden of things that go beyond death. For example, grief. For example, trauma, fear. Lots of things are happening that are still impacting people. And we should ask ourselves, are we adequately prepared, right, to really help people to deal holistically with all of the things that are going on? We're here to talk about racism. So let's talk about it, right? When I mention the word racism, of course, the thing, at least in my mind, I think I just Googled the word racism a few months ago, and these were pictures that came up. And I think that when we talk about racism, often that is what comes to mind, right? Acts of interpersonal racism, the things that we can see, the things that we can call out, right? The injustices that are quite obvious. This is not right. This person is being mistreated. And that's important. And it is still happening. And that also influences many of the same factors that we know influences community members' willingness to engage with health systems, right? If I believe or if I feel that my life is in danger, right? Or that I am not going to be treated with respect or all of these things, why would I want to engage with you, right? When we think about it. I told you that I could stand here and talk about any topic and we would still come back to many of these same root factors. I was happy to learn, right, about one of the projects here focused on Black women and infant mortality rates and trying to tackle that. I promise you, this slide was already there before I learned that this morning. But I put it here as an example of how and why all of these things are tied together. And if we're talking about racism, we're also thinking about things like medical racism, who is taken seriously, who is not, who is in essence being seen as being left to die, right? And one of the most glaring issues, I think, high rates of maternal mortality, period, that we have in this country, but in particular among Black women, astronomical rates, higher than many so-called third world countries. So high that I can tell you the truth, many of us are actually scared to get pregnant because you don't know. It's almost like Russian roulette, right? And I think that recently we've paid increasing attention to it because we've seen that old narrative of, well, only poor people die, or only uneducated people die, or only people who are not engaged or don't have social support die, which within itself, these are all valuable people and their lives are equally important. But it's easy, right, to sort of assign this sort of personal blame. But when we start to see high profile people like Serena Williams and Allison Felix and all of these other women who we know have all of the economic resources in the world, who have worldwide platforms, who everybody knows Serena's gonna speak her mind, right? And for someone like that to say I was ignored, I knew, that I was at high risk for certain blood clots, et cetera. I was not taken seriously. I almost died. That then says, hey, if it can happen to these people, it can happen to any of us. And why is it happening, right? The person in the top right corner was a friend of mine, Dr. Shalon Irvin, right? Also a Hopkins alum. I counted, I think she had 13 letters behind her name in terms of her degrees and her credentials. Dual PhD, MPH. She was a lieutenant in like the public health service, an epidemiologist at the CDC. And she was essentially left to die. She had major complications after her one and only pregnancy. She and her mother were very vocal about what was happening. They were repeatedly sent back home, sort of dismissed, and ultimately she died of postpartum hypertension, right? And within the academic world, I think this hit many of us in a different way, right? Because it then was, this could happen to her, right? It's not like abstract anymore. And also, if it can happen to her, what else is happening to people that we don't know about, to people who have fewer resources? And so when things like this happen, and if we are trying to build trust, trying to say that we're moving beyond, this level of where the communities already think that certain people are not valued, these are the types of things that could really set us back, but that we have to work doubly hard to try and overcome. We know that interpersonal racism, not the only form, right? When we really think about what plays a major role and why, so we often hear that your zip code can tell more about your health than many other indicators, right? Why is it that your neighborhoods or other places that we can then quantify, how did they come to be, right? If you really start to ask yourself questions, why are there so many major cities where you can sort of, just automatically pinpoint. You already know, right, which neighborhoods have a shorter life expectancy, which neighborhoods have less access to resources, all of these things. And we have to think about, sort of what are the policies that were in place, for example, redlining, that actually shaped why our public education systems, our neighborhoods, our resources look the way that they look. And what is it that we're doing about it, even at a policy level, to help to overcome some of this? I had to put kidney disease in here because, it's in me. So institutional racism is another form. And that's why this slide is here. Actually, I feel like kidney disease is like the melting pot for all things that goes wrong, especially kidney failure, right? There's so many different things that go wrong. But in particular, when we think about the type of treatment that patients ultimately receive, for example, whether or not people receive a transplant versus remaining on long-term dialysis, and why is it that certain people have such a hard time getting through, these different processes. There are lots of points at which we know that there are major barriers. And in particular, in the example of institutional racism, we think about things like differential transplant referral rates, or even our lack of a national system of even being able to track things like referral rates. When we think about things like lack of decision support for treatments at early stages in certain places versus others, all of these things play a role in ultimately what happens to people. I never like to end on just, oh, woe is us, bad news, bad news, bad news, right? Where do we go from here? What can we actually do about it? So returning sort of back to the cancer space, a couple of years ago, the NIH had a program that they called the Centers for Population Health and Health Disparities, where there were 10 different centers sort of deemed almost like centers of excellence, focused on either tackling cancer disparities or cardiovascular disparities. At Johns Hopkins, we were awarded one of the cardiovascular disparities centers, but all of the centers sort of came together and wrote a series of papers around lessons learned and best practices, and how do we really overcome some of the gaps that we currently have in interventions and research, et cetera. And our group sort of led one of the papers, Achieving Health Equity by Closing the Gaps in Healthcare Disparities, Interventions, and Research. And we talked about the fact that we understand that there are factors that are influencing the existence of healthcare disparities at multiple levels of influence. Yet we often don't develop interventions that target multiple levels of influence or even multiple targets, right? We also don't often develop interventions that truly are co-designed by members, right, of the target group or members of a particular community, and who are active players in every phase of the work. And because of this, we often say, we sort of continue to see many of these same patterns. We'll see some gains and then they'll go away. We also don't often have resources to think about things like sustainability. When the grant ends, what will happen? And there were several of the projects that were funded by this initiative that we sort of highlighted and talked about how those projects were designed to help to address some of these gaps. This is one of the projects that was developed at the Cancer Disparities Center at Harvard under the leadership of Dr. David Williams. And it was a smoking cessation project. And it was novel at its time in that it actually incorporated the use of electronic health records as well as interactive voice response to try and help to both identify the target population, to increase outreach, but then in particular, to also work towards developing a truly stakeholder engaged approach. They actually incorporated community referrals as part of the program, right? To address some of these social issues and really try to identify what are the existing resources, right, within the local communities. And then ultimately try to also tackle what may be some of the barriers to implementing this outside of the research context in the real world. And they showed that this type of approach, right, is one example of how we can think about framing future approaches. One of the major gaps that we identify, again, is that we don't often incorporate everyone, right? We don't often incorporate all of the key players who could bring their own lived experiences and expertise and help to shape the design and the implementation of the work. So some of the work that I've tried to do does just that, tries to engage multiple stakeholders from the community, from other disciplines, from, wherever that we think may be a good fit. Much of my work focuses on kidney disease, right? And transplantation, trying to think about how can we sort of partner with patients, with families, with faith institutions to try and tackle some of the barriers that we know to receiving a transplant and adequate care. We also have work now that focuses on COVID-19 because several of our community partners in the middle of the peak of COVID stated, well, this is good, but right now my members are worried about dying from COVID-19 or worried about whether the vaccines are safe or worried about these other topics. We trust you, and we trust that you are capable of bringing us the information that is correct, right? Wherever you get it from. And we would like to work with you. And we've continued that partnership. And in one of the congregations, I think we had over 90% of the members who ultimately decided to get vaccinated over the course of that program. I have another program, Health Freedom, which was mentioned. This was actually a program that was sort of, gifted to me from the founder who 20 years ago decided that she wanted to do something in partnership with communities that also recognize the legacy of Maryland's role in the Underground Railroad. She worked with historians and actually documented real paths on the Underground Railroad and sort of incorporated that into a CVD prevention approach, working in small groups and motivating people to actually develop heart healthy behaviors. And over time asked me if I would sort of take the lead in some of that. And of course, we always worry about what's happening behind us, who's coming behind us, and are we leaving a blueprint? So I try to do that. And all of our work, we think about, and I know this is a little hard to read, my apologies, but we think about many of the CBPR frameworks, right? Community-based participatory research frameworks. We think about what are the different motivations for why we're asking people to come to the table. What are their motivations for coming to the table? What are the different conditions and actions and expectations from our side, but also from their side, right? And then thinking about the level of co-design and co-development and thinking about, the priorities and goal setting. This is, as I mentioned, from the COVID-19 study. And these are two of my faith-based partners. And, we had several events, including actually going out and hosting sort of tables and helping to dispel myths and to bring information directly to the communities. Also working with members of the media, again, thinking about multiple stakeholder approaches to try and get information out in real time. Again, I'm looking at Lily in the background, policy advocacy, right? Sometimes, that's the hat that we don't think about, but often when we want to think about broader changes and when we recognize systemic issues impacting communities, we often have to then think about advocacy. And finally, thinking about how do we convene multiple groups of people. I mentioned my friend Shalon. One of the things that we did was convene a symposium, all devoted to tackling Black maternal health disparities. And multiple people showed up, including sort of here in the center, Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, as well as several state Department of Health and city Department of Health leaders, and Shalon's mother and her child were all there. And we sort of talked about next steps and lessons learned. And I think that's ultimately also how we will tackle any issue, right? By bringing the right people to the table, by thinking about what can we learn from each of these different levels of influence from each of these different topics, and how can we bring it all together. For the trainees in the room, we do, as I mentioned within the introduction, we do have some open online courses around different health equity research methods, and these are freely available that you take at your own pace. And just sort of ending with some key recommendations of lessons that we've learned and things that we think about, and how do we advance this type of work? How do we tackle racism, and how do we advance health equity? We have to think about patients and families as holistic beings and not as just a person with a certain condition or disease. We have to leverage community strengths and build these partnerships. We have to acknowledge, right, and tackle the role of systemic racism in perpetuating health disparities. We have to engage key stakeholders from different facets and different aspects and disciplines. And we have to think about things like feasibility and sustainability of our efforts. And then finally, we have to think about how to tackle some of these larger societal and health system problems at multiple levels. And when we think about new policies, new universal policies, are we also thinking about what could be unintended consequences and barriers for the same groups who often experience health disparities? In the sense of racism and bias, there are now several tools. This is from the AAMC, Unconscious Bias Resources for Health Professionals. And the NIH also has a scientific workforce diversity toolkit as well. So these are resources that we wanted to leave for people who wanted to learn more. And I'll end by acknowledging the life and memory of a dear friend, Dr. Carlton Haywood Jr., whose birthday is today, but who unfortunately passed away on New Year's Eve, 2021, of complications from sickle cell anemia, a condition that he lived with, but also had gained national prominence as a leading expert in thinking about how do we treat people with lifelong chronic illnesses, in particular young Black men who may often be seen as drug seeking when they're living through pain crises. What is the role of racism? What is the role? He's a bioethicist, just a brilliant and kind individual. And so I like to end by dedicating this lecture on racism to Carlton, in addition to Mr. Greg White. And I thank you very much for listening. And I hope that something that I said was aligned with what you hope to gain today. So thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Purnell. We're going to open it up for questions and answers. And this is the way I want it to work since we have folks virtually. We're going to take questions in the room first. And as soon as those wane down, I'm going to be gathering the questions from online, and Lisa will bring the microphone back to me. So Lisa, take the microphone, and if you have a question, please put your hand up.
Quiet. Am I scared? I know I'm super tall. I know you're thinking about a good one to trip me up.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Really appreciate that. I just wanted to mention that the reason that most of the students just had to leave
Oh,
is
I
that
know.
they have
Yeah,
a
they have a
required
class.
class, and I
Yes.
know they wanted to stay and ask you questions, but because this is going to be recorded, I thought maybe on behalf of the students, I would ask, what would be your main advice to a medical student or trainee in like how to integrate this at the busy stage of the training that they're involved in?
That's a great question. And, I think that your level of involvement may have these ebbs and flows, right? There are times where you are able to sort of devote more time to with this type of work, as many of you know, there's this foundational phase, right? The relationship building phase, the phase of actually demonstrating that you are a person who's worthy, right, of partnering with a particular community member. And so in that foundational phase, sometimes there are things that are sort of easy wins that don't require a lot of time if you're very busy, meaning things like attending community events, things like introducing yourselves to key organizations or leaders and, showing up without asking for anything. I think that that's often important in that early phase. As you continue to kind of think about, whether or not you want to focus more on, things like medical education or, sort of solely clinical practice versus incorporating research into what you're doing, I think that then you ask yourself again that question, what do I care about? And what is it that, I can do a better job of learning? For me, it was always important to have a mentor, to have someone that I could at least see and try to model the behavior of how do you build meaningful relationships? How do you, treat people with, well, I already knew how to treat people with respect, but how do you do it within the context of having others as partners, right, on a project or a grant? How do you sort of navigate that? And I sort of was able to sort of join existing teams. Sometimes those are easier if you don't have as much time. But if you have dedicated time, thinking about what are the opportunities that are available, are there certain groups that, may resonate with your interest? Are there certain topics? And then just trying to maximize the opportunity that's in front of you. I think not over promising is really important because whatever you decide to do next, of course, your reputation will always precede you. And so if you are someone who builds a reputation of doing good work, being a good person, being someone who's genuine, someone who's dependable, I think that regardless of what that particular opportunity is, those things will continue to open doors for you in the future. And the world is a lot smaller than we think, right? And if we get certain reputations, lots of people talk and know each other. And especially when it comes to establishing your credibility within a given community, right? If you gain a reputation for not being a good partner, that travels. On the contrary, if you gain a reputation for being a great person, which I think is what has helped me in terms of why it's easier to not just focus on one condition. Because if you're known as a person who tries to be honest, tries to lead with respect and things of that nature, then people don't care as much about the exact content area. They care more about that relationship and they care more about who you are as a person and your motivations for wanting to work with them. So I would keep those things in mind.
This is a question regarding if you're the patient,
Okay.
and I've been a patient, of course, with a doctor in the past. Didn't take me serious at all, and I almost died on the table having a baby. My heart stopped and everything. And so, what kind of question can you ask your new position if they will take you serious in anything that you tell them?
That's a great question. You know what? I might punt. I might punt it over here. I think I'm gonna punt that one. I mean, I have some thoughts. I think many of us have had those types of situations, whether we felt like we didn't, quite get the respect that we deserve, or sometimes, it's not a good fit for other reasons and had to kind of find a new clinician. I don't know. I mean, let's open that one up. What are questions to kind of figure out whether or not a person would be a respectful provider? I'm pointing over here. Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, I want to pump that one. Yeah. Hey, do it. Do it. And the vice chancellor has spoken. Yeah, that's such a great question. Versus just kind of trial and error. Anybody want to throw anything out there? I think Eugene has something. Did I make that up? Oh, I thought you had your hand. Sorry. Yeah, he did. Okay, you did. Yeah. So yeah, okay. I mean, there's no wrong answer, right? Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes down to just a lot of what you were talking about, like my experience as a trainee, I come in not knowing anything most of the time into a patient's room or feeling that way. And patients expect me to have all the answers for them. But I think at the end of the day, you come in with just an open heart, a warm heart, and are able to speak to them and treat them like a human being rather than some figurehead who has some power over them. If you can break down that power differential, I found that that is something that opens up the conversation to really explore those complex interactions that they've had in the past and hopefully be able to do right by them.
I love it. That's a great question. That's a great answer. We snapping for you. Yeah, I love it. Yes. And I love the fact like listening, right? And I think that for at least for me, being honest about what you know and what you don't know, right? Versus, coming in as if you have all the answers to everything and that you already kind of have everything scripted. So for me, the listening piece and actually being willing to sort of partner in terms of what might be the next best step for my own experience for me, as a fellow person, I think most of us have been a patient at some point. Those are important for me.
Hello.
Hi.
Got a question online here for
Okay.
you from Lynn Jones. Hi, Lynn. She asks, have you seen this information integrated in medical student resident training curriculum successfully? And how would you take steps to accomplish this?
Yes, we've done it. Thankfully, yes. So I can sort of talk about some of the things that, I've sort of been involved in and how we've sort of tackled that. So, I'll start by saying that for our medical students at Hopkins now, I think on day one, they have like an entire block that's sort of called health disparities and something, something. So sorry, I'm not good at remembering titles, but I know health disparities is the lead, right? So literally on day one of medical school, it's a series of sort of lectures and experiences within the community, bringing in different speakers. I know I did it a few times for several years, and sort of starting with that and thinking about what are these social and lived experiences and other things that may also influence the overall health. So that's a core component I know of medical school day one. We also have, at least at Hopkins, our urban health residents have a whole block of time that's devoted to doing a community sort of engaged experience. So whether it's, sort of along the lines of a longer term project with one of the community organizations or sort of working in teams, there's actually devoted time as part of their residency. And in my role with the Broncotti Center, we sort of also work to incorporate some didactic training into like the noon conferences that are sort of weekly, as well as sort of thinking about how can we help to develop some of the partnerships between our sort of, trainee groups and the organizations within the community. And finally, at the Center for Health Equity for 5 years, I sort of led in our education and training core with that group where we developed those open access, courses, which surprisingly, I know over 6,000 people sort of completed it worldwide. And that sort of, I think, introduced people to several experts in how to, think about important research strategies. So how to do things like social epidemiology or CBPR, and how do we build true partnerships, even thinking about things like photo voice, right? And so being able to kind of get that out there in a way that allows people to do it at their own pace. So we've sort of done a combination of things, and also as a part of that, we sort of developed this matching system to match a potential trainee with a faculty member who's already engaged in doing this type of work and who may have time available to serve as a mentor, whether it's career development or whether that person actually works towards an actual project in this space. So those are some ways we've tried to tackle it.
Two other really interesting questions from the ether, and I'm going to pose them together. So
Okay.
the first one is from Cheryl Harrington. She asks, with health systems becoming larger and being a primary employer for many to medical professionals, can you speak to the importance of becoming more active in policy and advocacy to create system change? And then stepping on from there, Anthony Brown asks, as a professional in healthcare, what are you and your Black counterparts doing to create some type of independence or Black healthcare? Although we have to work with what is out there, this system will never prioritize our well-being. So what will be next for us as Black folk to do for ourselves?
Well, when you say interesting, you weren't lying. They are. I'm like, those are, yeah. So the first one about health systems and sort of the role of health system as being partners in advocating for policy changes. I think that the health systems have a lot of power, right? A lot, in terms of when you think about policy, I think, you think about people say the big P, and also the little p. The big P, of course, you think about legislation and things like CMS and, advocating for those changes. But the little p is also important, meaning how do we implement what's already sort of existing? What do we prioritize? How do we sort of advocate for different reimbursement structures so that, we can devote more time to things that we know are important within that sort of patient encounter, but also as individuals, right? Working within health systems and within communities, we also have like our own skill sets, and we, can also advocate, as I kind of showed this picture, for things, many times when there's new legislation, even at the state and local level being considered, right, there are these open forums where sometimes your voice can be heard. Often, within a given context for a condition, there may be, an open period where we are thinking about, well, will this be a good change or a bad one? And you can openly advocate one way or the other. As you continue to move, right, you can join professional societies who often get asked to write position statements about certain things that go directly to Congress. But as health systems, I think one important thing is also how do we treat our own employees? And meaning, people ranging from, the president of the university all the way to the people who are responsible for keeping our hospitals clean, for keeping our grounds clean. Do we have, appropriate health insurance policies? Do we have things in terms of a livable wage? These are things that I think when we don't think about policies, our own policies, because in many areas, the health system may be the largest employer in that city or even that state. And so I think there's actually a lot of power and negotiation both at the big P level, but even within our own institutions and what we prioritize. Now, back to the second question, right? How do we sort of build our own, island or utopia? I think that, in many ways, we do have now dedicated societies, dedicated groups that are sort of laser focused on, the health of a particular population. For example, we have the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, all of these different caucuses. We also have, this group focused on state legislators and at the local level as well. But within the context of healthcare, there are groups like the National Medical Association that was developed because the American Medical Association was not welcoming to people like Black physicians. That agenda focuses on the health of Black communities. So I think that we do have some existing organizations, and to the extent that you are able to sort of get involved with some of those existing efforts, or even finding out locally what those efforts are, I think that that could be one way, right, to feel better connected to those groups that are prioritizing the unique experiences of certain groups of people, including, for example, the lived experiences of Black patients. So, while I don't think that we're at or ever at a point where we can just kind of go and, build our own utopia, I do think that it's important for us to think about what are the transferable skill sets, characteristics, knowledge base, et cetera, within our existing health systems where, we all can think about how to improve the overall health and what are the patterns that we see within certain communities, including Black communities, and where can we fit into that fight.
Thank you. We have about 11 minutes left. Are there any more questions in the room? Yes, Myra.
We have not only students here, but both online and in the room, some people that have leadership responsibilities for the institution. And as we think about wanting to do authentic and beneficial work with communities, we're often following in the footsteps of people that didn't do so well at that. So do you have advice for those of us that are coming after? How do we get things right when the people before us maybe kind of missed the mark?
How do we clean up the mess?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say that, but
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's real, right? Because often the reason why members of certain communities don't want to engage with, certain institutions is because of, what is it? The sins of the father. Because the last time that they opened their doors, someone swooped in, made all these grand promises, took, samples or surveys or, received grant fund or whatever it was, and then disappeared. And you never heard from that person again. Or the person was disrespectful. Or there are lots of different things. So I think for us, one, it's important to take the time to learn the history of the relationship between your institution and the communities that are your target areas, right? I had to do that. Not being a native of Baltimore, I had to kind of learn, well, what is the relationship between East Baltimore and Johns Hopkins University? And also, what are the different groups, right, that have previously engaged with the different organizations that I'm sort of reaching out to? I think that also sort of not taking things personally as a personal attack is important. It's important for us to be able to walk into a space and be open to listening to criticism, be open to listening to, sometimes people need to vent, about their frustrations, and, to recognize when something is directed at you as an individual versus you in your role as an agent of a different place where someone else may have inflicted harm. I think it's important to listen. I think it's important not to dismiss, flat out other people's lived experiences. People's perceptions are their perceptions. For me, it's been important in certain aspects to make it clear I'm here as an advocate. I'm here as a person who identifies as a health equity researcher. I'm not here in my capacity as a representative of my university or my medical center so that people can sort of not feel as on edge, or if people make comments, it's not my job to immediately jump in and defend or correct. That is all counterintuitive, right? And so I think that that's part of that foundational work. And often, to be honest, there are people who have caused great harm within the communities. And the extent to which we are willing to learn about that, we are willing to acknowledge it, we're willing to allow people's to know that their feelings, whatever they are valid, but then to sort of describe how we are trying to move forward in a different path and wanting to, sort of fix that. I think that's the key to whether or not you'll be invited into that space or you'll become one of the names on the list of do not engage, right? Do not contact. So I think that, that's really an important question. But thanks for sticking it out, those of you who did not have class. And again, thank you for the invitation to be here. It's been wonderful to learn about the institution and the different neighborhoods that you serve. And, again, wonderful to be able to participate in this very important occasion. So thank you again.